All right, Bang Bang. Today is Tuesday. It is August 17th. Welcome to the Dog Walk presented by Barstool Sports. Chief, how are we today?
I'm in recovery mode. So you and I had a big weekend out in Connecticut with the Quenvilles. I feel like people have seen pictures, video, and podcasts coming out the next week, not this week, next week.
On Redline Radio.
Yeah, on Redline Radio, our other show here, obviously. And yeah, I had a great weekend, but I also didn't have any recovery time, restful weekend. So I'm struggling. I'm going to try to do my best today to turn my brain back on. I had an all-time bad brain day yesterday too on Sunday.
Did you?
You didn't see that whole interaction with Tom. It was I don't even know how to accurately describe the story because it was that dumb. Where Tom was like, "Hey, I wonder if they'll let me put my second bag in the overhead because it's not a full flight." And I was like, "Well, I don't have a bag. I'll just pretend like it's mine." He's like, "You don't have a bag?" And I'm like, "Wait, yeah, I do. I left it at the gate. I'm a dummy. So I might be
you
fighting
had already
my way."
scanned your ticket, right?
Oh yeah, I had to run off the plane.
What did
run
they
off
say
the
to you
jetway.
when you ran off?
I was like, I have to go get my bag. It's right there. And then they're like, okay, we'll get it. And then I tried to come back in the line. They're like, well, your ticket's not scanned. I'm like, you already scanned it. I'm D9. I'm going there.
That's
so
still
okay.
when you get in that situation. It's like, no, please, you just saw me.
Yeah, you just saw me.
Please.
So, and this is a little bit of a complex subject today. So I'm gonna do my best. I'm not an economist. I should probably say that off the top. But it is what we're talking about is a website and a theory called What the Fuck Happened in 1971.
All right. So hopefully the bad brain fog is gone, and we'll be able to get into this.
Yeah, because it is a very important and interesting subject matter. And I would encourage everybody to go to whatthefockhappened1971.com after listening to this to see all this for yourself.
Cool. So we'll get into it. Before we do, though, we want to talk about being Roman ready, though, Chief.
Gotta be.
What does that mean to you?
To me, it means, this is the summer of love, right? People are getting back out, having a great time, running around, meeting people, dating new people. And even if you've just been in a relationship for a while, you might be, having a little bit more fun, and you want to be Roman ready, and you don't want to be in that situation where it's go time and your general, your guy, your penis just doesn't work. Okay? So this Roman Ready is an ED medication that you pop, you take it, an hour later, you're ready to go no matter what.
Yep, and you could get it at getroman.com/Barstool. You could talk to a U.S. licensed healthcare professional. You guys know the drill with Roman. It's discreet. It's a very straightforward process, and it's convenient. You don't got to make an appointment, go in, see whatever. It's very convenient. You could do it all online. You could just get started by going to getroman.com/Barstool today. And if you're prescribed, get 50% off, 50, off your first month of ED treatment. Make sure you're ready to have confidence and control this summer. Roman Ready.
I say this with Roman ads all the time, but they talk about a month's worth. You would be surprised what Roman deems as a month's worth. It's, it's a lot. So they think you're having a lot of sex, so it's great bang for your buck.
Correct. So, all right, the summer of 71.
Yeah, it's actually
just the year of 71.
Well, it's actually perfect because it was right about this time. I think it was August 15th of 1971. So we just had the 50th anniversary of this policy where Richard Nixon took us off the gold standard. And, it kind of almost relates to that Strauss-Howe a little bit, where we have some decisions at certain periods of time in the past, and everything just kind of leads to a more chaotic time that it feels like we're living in right now. And that is, this removing the United States from the gold standard in 71 might be a contributing factor, we'll say.
Okay.
So, and this is another, this is a sweetheart type of talking point for the Bitcoin community too. It's all the crypto people, because one of their biggest criticisms, and we should probably go back, in the history of gold and money and things like that to really kind of understand how and why this has come about and how it relates to Bitcoin now. So, gold has been used as a currency at least for 2,600 years. So they think the first actual gold coins printed out were from 2,600 years ago, and I believe it was India. And that became a currency all over the world by all different cultures that had no interactions with each other, because everybody kind of figured out through having, everyone was trying to have a system of money. So it's not like, hey, I'll trade you this leather bag for, a sandwich or a spear or whatever you needed. It was just like they wanted something that was just, gold or had a value system of its own. And that's where they call these like the attributes of money. Okay. It has to be
not swapping shit all the time.
Right. So it's not just a barter system all the time. Right. Right. So that's like money is a technology, right? Like even if it's gold or seashells or, whatever your unit of sand dollars. Okay. And that's I believe that's where the term sand dollar came from, because certain cultures literally use those as dollars. Okay. And, but you have to be attributes of money. You have to be confident you can store your wealth in it. So you like the fruits of your labor. So whatever it is, whatever you're doing, it's human production has to be stored in some sort of thing that will keep its value. Okay. It's got to be transportable. So you can obviously carry it around. So it's like, hey, like I have all this land. Well, you can't exactly just be like, I'm going to give you my land, for an exchange for something. Like, I suppose you could, but it's not easy, right? It has to be divisible. It has to be resistant to counterfeit, and it has to be scarce, because if there's just like an infinite supply of them, then it's just like, why? Well, what would you care about that for? Because and you can think of that now. It's like, why? It'd be like sand, right? Like sand. No one cares about sand because it's just like it's not scarce. It has to be something that has like that people want, people have confidence in, and is thought to be scarce.
That's like when you really start figuring things out. I remember being a kid, and I remember hearing about like America's debt and being like, I don't understand. Why don't we just print more money?
Well, but Ed, there are people like big time economists who really do think that way.
Really?
Yeah. So that's something that's called modern monetary theory, MMT, and there's all sorts of podcasts by people smarter than me talking about it, and I want to say it was like around New Year's Eve, and like I was driving around Colorado a lot, listening to those, and it was like, seemed crazy to me. But that there is that theory that, hey, like we need money, why don't we just print more?
Yeah.
And that is I would say an economic theory that is maybe not widely supported, but is gaining traction. And then it's like, well, so that you'll have these people say, and we are kind of like, because we're no longer on this gold standard, and really nobody is anymore, that it's all about consumer confidence. So you really can. It's not pegged to anything. It's not redeemable for anything. It's just like, how do we feel about ourselves? Okay, we're good. So this is worth X, and that's how you start to get like these crazy inflations that we're going to talk about now, is because there's no one exactly knows how much it's worth, and it's not exactly scarce because you can print however many you want, and
and that's why I don't know if you're going to get into this, so I apologize, but that's, correct me if I'm wrong, that's why everybody sucks Bitcoin's dick, right? Because
correct. That's one of the reasons.
It's so finite.
Right. It's like 21 million.
Yes.
They have like a fixed number right now. It is infinitely divisible, so like that's something I would like someone smarter than me to explain that to me, because if there is a fix on the high end, but it can be divisible forever, isn't that sort of like if it just could go on forever in either direction? That makes me think that maybe it's not necessarily finite. But anyways, it's a whole different conversation. And
actually, while we're here too, this is a perfect spot. We talked about debt. I want to talk about Upstart real quick too.
Yeah.
Upstart.
This is like the Upstart episode.
Exactly, it really is. And I just like I'm sure there's going to be more spots for this, but it just felt like to sit here to talk about Upstart right now, because listen, you know what it's like to have kind of debt pile up and feel kind of lost and feel kind of trapped. That's why Upstart's here for you. It's a fast and easy way to pay off your debt with a personal loan that's all done online. Whether it's paying off credit cards, consolidating high-interest debt, or funding personal expenses, over 500,000 people have used Upstart to get one fixed monthly payment. You really do want that.
Yeah.
The worst is when you got everything everywhere, and you're like,
it's hard to keep track.
Yes, exactly. So that's why Upstart could be great for you here. It's more than just your credit score. It's expanding access to affordable credit. And unlike other lenders, Upstart considers your income and current employment to find a smarter loan for you, okay? With 5-minute online rate check, you can see your rate upfront for loans between $1,000 to $50,000. You can receive the funds as fast as one business day after accepting your loan. So find out how Upstart can lower your monthly payments today. When you go to upstart.com/Eddie, that's upstart.com/EDDIE. Go do it.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is a great system. Over 500,000 people. So
yeah, check it out. Can't recommend it enough. And then back to this other thing quickly about modern monetary theory. And this was something that was really discussed a lot in the last couple of years because we've had a lot of printing of money to help people get through the pandemic, and that you could theorize that leads to inflation. And people, so all we ever hear about is, hey, we don't have any money. Hey, school teachers need a raise. Well, that's tough. We don't have any money for them. We don't have any money in the budget for this infrastructure project, this or that. And you hear like, oh, $3 trillion. Oh, we can't afford that. And so, but it's like when you need to, if you have to bail out the banks in 2008 or we have this pandemic, it's like, oh, all of a sudden it's there. We'll just print more. So it's like a very odd system, and it's a difficult thing to wrap your head around. And what the people with, both critics and proponents of this modern monetary theory, they'll tell you where it's like, well, what's the point of taxes if the government doesn't need any money to pay for anything because they can just print whatever they want? And what do you think the answer to that is?
Say it one more time. Sorry.
What if the government doesn't need taxes? Because you're always told like, hey, you have to pay taxes to pay for the roads and this and that. But if you have money that you can just print whenever you feel like it for stimulus, for industry bailouts, whether that's auto or airline or the banking system, and you can just bail people out, just print more. Then what do we need taxes for?
So what's the problem with doing it that way?
What's the purpose of taxes if you don't need taxes to pay for anything? And technically, like you have the Secretary of the Treasury and the Chairman of the Federal Reserve, rather. I'm blanking on this guy's name. Starts with a B. I'll look it up. But you've seen him in like pictures. If you've seen The Big Short, like they have clips of him in there, and he's just like, and he says the same thing. Like the only reason for taxes. So Ed, you're paying taxes, sales taxes, think of all the things that are taxed. It's really just public policy, and it's a way, especially income tax, is a way to just take money out of the system as a means to kind of like control the money supply and inflation. But it's really just, it's not really used the way that people think it's used.
Okay.
So it's not like, hey, well, I paid my taxes, so thank God all the potholes are filled and the schools are paid for. It doesn't really work that way. It's really, and it might work that way on like a local level, but nationally, it's really just used as a means to help control the money supply. So you don't have like crazy runaway inflation. Okay.
Gotcha.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Isn't there a way where like is it dumb to say like is there a
We're
system
going to say
where,
lots
like,
of dumb things.
Okay,
right?
okay.
Yeah.
Like is there a system there you could just be like, hey, you have to spend X?
What do you mean?
So like, keep the economy going, and then that way like it could, or would that just create more inflation if you're spending more?
That's a yes and no. So there's been talks of what's called a fair tax by different people. Usually it's from people on the right side of the aisle. I remember Mike Huckabee was a big proponent of this. But instead of paying, and he would be like, no one has to pay any income tax. Okay, that would be the thing. Like nobody, you have no income tax. You have no, there a lot of other taxes would be removed, but then you would have like an insane sales tax. So it's like city of Chicago. Like I noticed this when I shop out by my parents or when I shop in the city. It's like that extra 7-8% or whatever they're charging as a sales tax. Like fuck, like that really adds up. If you go to the grocery store and it's all that you spend $100, it's another 8, 12, however much gets added to your bill just in the sales tax or your clothes or whatever.
Yeah, I remember being stunned when I went to the Mall of America. I bought a T-shirt and it was $18 on the dot.
Yeah, because they don't have a sales tax. Yeah, and I know that's like a thing in New Hampshire and like a few other places. So I know like I have family members who are like, oh, they live in Massachusetts and they'll drive up, an hour to New Hampshire to do their Christmas shopping because it's like everything's on sale because there's no sales tax. Then you just drive it back over. So, so if you did this fair tax, kind of it's also called like a fair tax is like a political way to make it sound more attractive, like what's fair. So like a more I would say reasonable way to look at that or a more accurate way to look at it is just called a consumption tax. So you're going to pay in some of these different models and proposals. And this is away from what we set out to talk about, but it's interesting.
My fault.
No,
I
no,
feel
no.
like we're fucking.
Well, I want the listeners to know that, you know, this, we're weaving around, but this is another good point. But a consumption tax would be at like 20 to 25%, depending on who you listen to. So you're not paying income tax. A lot of your other taxes are eliminated. But like now your gallon of milk, if you get, you know, let's say your gallon of milk is $5. Well, now it's, you know, $6, depending on what your taxes are. And so the people who criticize this fair tax, and I would say that they rightly criticize it, is that is it's a way more punitive tax on the lower class and middle class, because if you're a billionaire, you don't give a fuck what the sales tax is, right? Like you're going to buy your milk, you're going to $1 or whatever. But if you're paycheck to paycheck and you're struggling to get that gallon of milk, that raising everything $1 or depending on what it is, that really cuts into your discretionary income a lot compared to what it would be for, you know, people who are in that, you know, the top 1% or top 10% or something like that. So that's why that has one of the reasons why that's the consumption tax is heavily criticized and it's never really taken hold in the United States.
Okay.
So
my apologies.
No, it was a good question. I love when we do that. But now this goes back. So now going back to 1971, okay, and even further than that. So in the history of the world, like we were saying, all over the world, that you would have gold, okay, in a lot of places, and then other places that didn't have gold readily available used other things. That's why we said seashells. And I think, you know, it's kind of like a famous story now, and it's just like kind of shines a light on like what happened to the Native Americans here. But the Dutch East India Company came to Manhattan Island, and, you know, the financial center of the world now. You know what they paid for it?
What did they pay for?
For the whole island.
God, I mean,
in today's money, the value would be about $1,100 for the entire island of Manhattan.
Sounds like a deal.
And you know what they gave them? A combination. There's like a word that starts with a G that's in Dutch, but it's basically they gave them beads and seashells and trinkets and these other things that were the equivalent of $24 back then. And the native, First Nations people back then were like, oh well, no one really owns the land, so we'll just take this shit and fuck them. And they're like, no, like we own this now. You have to leave. And now that's Manhattan Island. And in today's value, it was about like $1,100 for the whole island, which is fucking insane. It doesn't even get you like your own apartment for a month in New York now. I know. It's crazy.
Who is to foresee that it would become the most densely populated city in America?
No, for sure. But even I think the Dutch knew, like, we got him. Here's take these fucking beads, and because that's what they traded in, and that really holds no value anywhere except for their own culture. So they thought they were getting a steal. Meanwhile, the Dutch and the rest of the world and even other like native cultures were using gold and silver and other precious metals, and for whatever reason that tribe up there, because they didn't have access to gold because it just wasn't in the soil up there, didn't have it, give them what they like, and get the fuck out of here. And now New York City is New York City. So that was kind of crazy. But over time, as all these people across Europe and Egypt and all these developing historical Greece, etc., people started storing their money and their gold in bank vaults. So that's really the idea of the bank came. It was heavily guarded, and then you would give them your gold. They would then give you a note, and like you could take that note at any time as like, hey, you Eddie, I have this note. Hey, I need $1. You give me that $1 for something you want to buy from me. I take that to the bank, and they give me the actual physical gold. And that was the way things worked for thousands of years. And that was the system. That's where like the idea of banks and banking came along, and they switched to that paper money, the note, because you weren't having to carry around like a satchel of gold like you're Scrooge McDuck. It's just easier to carry. It's more divisible, but you knew like your wealth and your actual physical gold was safe because it was still in the bank. And And so after World War II, the United States, because now like the world is being remade, right? Like you had all these great powers, and the United States had spent a shit ton of money in World War II, funding France and help fund, like gave out these loans to these different countries to rebuild their country. And part of this, the way this worked, was because all these countries were, rebuilding, struggling, didn't have a lot, had to spend a lot to rebuild their countries. The United States pegged itself to gold, and then every other country really basically in the world pegged their currency to the United States dollar. So the United States had tremendous power because like you never really had to go into debt because you had all this gold. We've talked about like Fort Knox before. Mm-hmm. And so the United States had all this gold. And then like in the 60s, France started losing confidence in the United States and our gold reserves and their own currency and they were the leaders of this, but a lot of other countries started being like, hey, like we're going to just tie our own currency to gold. So we're not going to be tied to you guys anymore. We're just going to tie ourselves to gold. Here's paper notes. Give us our gold back. Okay. So the United States had their gold supply really depleted because that was the arrangement. Mm-hmm. Is that if you want to cash in, you can cash in. We'll go knock on Fort Knox and we'll send you your equivalent gold back for this at I think it was $35 an ounce was like the set price, and which I think would fluctuate back then, but that was what I read was $35 an ounce. And so now it's into the 60s and into 68. And the United States starting to like panic, and Richard Nixon's starting to panic because what do they have going on? They have Vietnam, mm-hmm. and it is very expensive to build bombs and planes and supply soldiers all the way across the world in this war that was seemingly going on forever. And, excuse me. And so they were having difficulty financing the war, which if your currency is tied to a fixed asset like gold, eventually you can just run out of money. Okay. So, and that was a big problem. If people have ever watched the Pacific or studied World War II at all, like they had this guy in the Pacific, I'm blanking on his name, but he won the Medal of Honor at Guadalcanal. And instead of just having him stay in the Marines, he's like this good looking guy. They send him home, and they sent him home. Basically, they thought that he would do more for the war effort, touring around the country, trying to get people, individual citizens, to buy war bonds. Be like, hey, like we'll pay you back later. Because the United States, like the government itself, was running out of money for World War II. So it's like that was a large part of the problem, was being able to finance the war itself. And that was something both sides were struggling with. So they were trying to sell war bonds to people. We'll pay you back later. And that, like you can, like you get a savings bond, you would get a war bond. So you buy it for 25 and it's 50 in 10 years or whatever it was. I'm making up those numbers. But that was like a big problem. And it was becoming a big problem in Vietnam too. And then it was doubled by the fact that all these countries were asking for their gold back. So Nixon, he had a quote, in 1971, I think it was August 15th, 1971, says, we're temporarily removing our currency to the gold standard. Okay, so he was supposed to be temporary. That was his initial statement. He did it by like presidential decree. It didn't go through Congress or anything. And then, so now like all those countries are asking for their gold back. Like, sorry, we don't do that anymore. You're still tied to us because, we're the United States and like our economy impacts everybody's economy. So you're still like United States. The dollar is still the reserve currency for the world to this day, but it's so much less valuable than it was in 1971, and it's less valuable all over the world, and especially less valuable domestically. So I want to read a couple things off to you that have changed, or what the standard.
You could just declare that.
What?
Like you just say we're away from the gold. No, like it's crazy.
It is kind of crazy. Just like we're off of that shit. Like, wait, what? And then it just never went back, never questioned it, because it, like, when he announced it, it was supposed to be temporary, and then we just never went back. And if it's like you look at,
so we actually did just print
Yes.
Money.
We just started printing money. And it was like, how do you feel about the United States? Like, oh, I feel pretty good about the United States, the economy. Well, okay, like we'll keep using it.
Damn.
Yeah, and then it's getting increasingly out of control. I want to read you some like
even now or then.
Now you could argue it's worse than ever, which is why the people banging the drum for Bitcoin. Okay, so I want to go over some of the costs of living in 1971. Okay. You ready?
Yes.
A new house in 1971 average cost $25,200. Your average income, $10,622,000 a year. Your average rent was $150 a month. Harvard tuition, which you probably now costs you like $400,000 or something insane, it was $2,600 a year.
That's absurd.
Okay,
that's absurd.
Okay, gas now feels like gas is getting out of control, but it's like sitting between $3.50 and $4. What do you think it was back then?
10 cents.
40 cents.
Okay.
So everything was just more manageable back then. So even though your 10,600, is you're like, well, that's way less than people are making now. But that $10,000 had way more buying power, right? Because now people really just have. They say most families really just have 4 things that they pay for, and it takes up almost all of their money. Tuition, their mortgage, those are the 2 biggest ones. I want to get the other ones too. But
food supply, vehicle.
So vehicles are up. Yeah, vehicle is definitely one of them. And then food is actually starting to go up again now because like inflation is becoming more pervasive because we've put so much money out into the system the last couple of years.
And another reason why people are using too many damn third-party apps.
That's part of it. Absolutely. If your food costs are going up because you're not buying it yourself. But a lot of the food supply back then, and I think I've said this on a podcast before too, but it used to cost more of your discretionary income or not even your income, but a larger or discretionary income rather. But it used to cost more of your income back then because you had better food. Okay, so there's 2 things. You had better food. And you had like less means of like refrigeration and things like that.
Yeah.
But prior to those times, prior to 1971, because now is like, holy shit, like if inflation's going up, there's one thing that people just won't stand for is like starving. Like we can't have people starving. So they kind of shifted kind of what we eat. So they went away from like this kind of like a more diverse, seasonal, local type of family farm supplying the surrounding area type of situation to these more and more and still increasing like these mega farms, and they're monocrop. They only grow corn, wheat, and soy, and those things have all been subsidized by the government to like kind of artificially keep food prices down below the rate of inflation where everything else is going insane. So, and then what's the result of that? And if you go to this, what the fuck happened in 1971? Because again, and sugar, okay, you're having a lot more sugar. Like people are eating shittier food, and they're eating more of it, but it's also cheaper. So you're having like all sorts of like health and disease problems go up. That if you really, obesity. Cancers, heart disease, all these things, with the exception of like, there's less smokers now. So with the exception of like lung disease and some of the things related to smoking, all the other diseases since 1971 are going up. And a lot of it, people speculate or theorize, is due to consumption of both the amounts of food because it's so much cheaper and the types of food because they're cheaper.
There's a lot more Whole Foodsy back then.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Before we get into part 2, though, Chief, I want to talk about being Roman ready. Roman, world's opening back up. New thrills on the horizon. Whether you've been in a relationship or just getting started or excited to get back out there and meet new people, when the moment comes, you want to be ready. You want to be Roman ready. So, you know the drill by now. You can get a free online evaluation if you're, having trouble with erectile dysfunction. all from the comfort and privacy of your own home. I mean, I know that could be probably a embarrassing thing. Maybe you don't want to. It shouldn't be, but I know it could be if you.
Oh, of course it is.
Yes.
Of course it is. So no one wants to be in that situation. Now you don't have to, because you always have reserves. You always have Roman to get you ready for when you need it. So Roman Ready. Have you ever seen that Larry David Curb Your Enthusiasm episode about that?
Actually, no.
It's related to this situation. Where like he equated it to like to juicing, like baseball players. Like you got to be ready. You got to be ready. So you just never want to be in that situation. So check out Roman.
Yeah, you get a licensed healthcare professional that'll work with you to find the best treatment plan. And if medication is appropriate, it ships to you free with 2-day shipping. It's a very discreet, convenient, and straightforward process. So go to GetRoman.com/Barstool today, and if you're prescribed, you get 50% off your first month of ED treatment. Make sure you're ready to have confidence and control this summer. Be Roman ready. All right, let's hop into part 2.
Like the term organic food didn't exist in 1945. It was just food, okay? And it wasn't until we had some of these after World War II. People started, that's when like chemicals and science is a great thing, and it really took off, and we're able to produce way more food with these different nitrogens and fertilizers, and changing the way like we grow things and the way and what we eat, and that's all awesome. But it also puts chemicals into the food. It puts like carbohydrate consumption's gone up like a ton. Simple carbohydrate.
We did the ice cream one about how the popsicle and the ice cream bar started, and we've talked about it before. The History Channel does that awesome thing, like the food that built America. I mean, I watched one on I think it was green beans. I forgot the woman who was the first one that figured out how to freeze these vegetables. She bought this company.
So like the Jolly Green Giant company.
Forget her name. She was, but whatever. And they just didn't have freezers, so it was not like it wasn't applicable. And then once advancement really just changed. So many things.
So and that the freezers things, and then also the ability to keep things not frozen, not only in your house, but also in transportation. So our logistics guy, White Sox Dave, he's just sending refrigerated trucks and trains and stuff all over the country to keep your spinach and all your that stuff growing in the valley out in California. They grow like fucking everything, and they can ship it, or we get stuff from Mexico. And the only reason that's possible is because really in the 50s and 60s, we saw this advancement in technology for keeping food fresh and colder. So you're adding preservatives sometimes, like these chemicals are bad for you, but you're less reliant on like what's around, like in your area. So it's, and I remember my grandparents telling me this. About they grew up in Boston in like the 20s and 30s, which is obviously Depression time too, and they were poor immigrant people. And then I also heard this story from a company of these people I used to work for. They were from Poland under communism, where it's like if they got an orange for Christmas, like that was like the highlight. Like, I can't believe I got an orange. Okay, I got a fresh fruit, because if you lived in these cold places, you just couldn't have fruit in the winter, because it just didn't grow. It was like it was gone, and you couldn't freeze it or keep it. So it's like if you didn't have it, it was just if you weren't from an area that could grow it, then you weren't getting it.
A delicacy,
right? It was a treat like you wouldn't believe, and so that is one of those technology pieces that changes. And then this is something that's a factor theoretically to going off the gold standard too, is because people were consuming like less good food, less local food, and you had cheaper ways and more. It was like people went away from like kind of like the art of farming and got into how can we make as much as we can for as cheap as we can and make a profit, and how can the government help us do that? By the government just gives farms subsidies all the time to keep them afloat, because they can't charge and they can't grow what they're supposed to. So it's like or not what they're supposed to, but like they have fewer options. And then if you go back to when we didn't even have you've heard of the Federal Reserve, and I feel like we've maybe talked about this maybe in 2019, but the Federal Reserve didn't even exist, until 1913 with Woodrow Wilson. He signed it into law. There's all sorts of theories about how that actually came together. I think that's maybe what we did the podcast on in 2019. But his quote about adding the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve is charged with the responsibility of printing money and controlling the money supply. Ben Bernanke is the guy who I was thinking of before, who with the B, who was chairman of the Fed. And so what Wilson said in 1930, or like after he signed it, and he was like, I didn't really know what I was doing. He goes, I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is now controlled by a system of debt. And that's because basically it's not just it's not the government who's printing the money anymore. It's this kind of separate quasi-government entity who's effectively printing the money and loaning it to the government at interest. So it's like we can never really. And how do you pay it back? Well, then you have to print more money to pay it back. So you're just like, when the national debt is going up and up and up and up and up, it's like, well, you can't ever really catch up to it, because the thing you need to pay it back, you need to get from the people who loaned it to you. So it's a very like convoluted system, and you could argue, or maybe I don't know if people could argue. I don't know what exactly the laws are, but there is a thing in the Constitution about the dollar. And so you have a constitutional dollar where it says at one time in the Constitution, it's the weight of gold or silver. Like that's it. And it has to be transferable for that dollar that's printed, and the government used to be in charge of that. When the Federal Reserve is basically a middleman between like their constitution and the government and the people themselves. So like that's kind of where things kind of went haywire. So then since and then you fast forward from 13, and then after the war, like things are, you think about like that, what people think about like the white picket fence and all this stuff, and everybody's having a house, and 50s and 60s, and while things weren't perfect, like we talked about the Strauss-Howe, like the economy is doing much better, and that was like the like that blooming period, that spring period of Strauss-Howe. And then when you start to get away from some of these fundamental things, that's when you see inflation and the price of goods and the value of the dollar and the value of your work just completely fall off. So from 1913 to 2015, the cumulative inflation has been 2,326%. And before that, for most of good Lord, and for most of human history, okay. And so in 1971, so it goes up gradually, right? Okay, from that time, it's like it kind of goes vacillates like up and down, and like if there's wars, there's other things like your inflation, there's going to be some factors, right? So in 1971, it had gone up over 60 years. Inflation had gone up by 300%, which you can attribute to several things, but it's kind of like a flat, gradual increase in inflation. So to go from, in the last 50 years, to go from 306% between 1913 and 1971, and then from today, it goes up another, from August 15th, 1971 till now, it's another 2,000%.
Oh, damn. So this is where the big spike came.
A huge spike. I want to pull up another, but like, and I remember I said before, like your cost of your house was $25,000. You're making about 10.5. Okay. So that's about, let's call it 2 years of work for the average person to be able to buy a house. Now it's almost 8 years of work. So like, that's what I mean. That's what they say, where it's like the wages haven't been able to keep up with inflation. So if you want to own your own home, it was way easier to do that prior to 1971, because even though you had less money on paper, it was worth so much more relative to like the cost of living. So you could get way more bang for your buck. So instead of, you might, let's say, I don't know what the average income is now.
Now, did that affect the interest rates as well in the 70s and the 80s? Because didn't the boomers get really screwed on that?
Say that again?
Like, did that affect the interest rates for buying a home in the 70s and the 80s? Or
yes.
If you know about that?
Yes.
So, I'm pretty sure the boomers, like, that was like a big thing.
It was definitely a big thing for them. But that is also like, if they had never, that was like, the interest rates went up like crazy under this guy, Paul Volcker. He just passed away. He was chairman of the Fed, starting under Carter, and then I want to say through the end of Reagan and maybe into the beginning of Bush. Like, he had a long term, but he really raised the interest rates to kind of push back against inflation And he was trying to like maybe push us closer to what we were prior to 71 because things had got out of control. And people would always be like, oh, OPEC, when we had those like the Iranian hostage crisis and the gas lines, if you look at the beginning of Miracle, the end of the 70s, it's like, what the fuck is going on? Like no one can get any gas. They have to like, while like the supply was part of the problem, another part of the problem was our dollar just didn't go, like we couldn't buy enough. So our dollar just didn't go as far for some of these fundamental needs that you have to be a person. So like we just didn't have enough. So it's like a combination. So you only ever hear about the supply side, but part of that problem is also our purchasing side. So Paul Volcker, through the chairman of the Fed, and people like hated him, especially people in like construction and like middle class people, because your interest rates were astronomical, and it was like a time of it was like painful, right? It was expensive because your interest rates were high, but the interest rates had to be high in a sense to get the economy and the dollar like kind of stabilized and under control, because you did have in the 70s like this really kind of crazy inflation. So that's kind of where some of that came from. But they were impacted by that. But according to this, so I said the average income in the United States in 2019, per a quick Google search, this seems low to me. Okay, household income, that seems better. It's $94,000, and which that seems high to me. Does that seem high to you?
94,000 combined.
Yeah, combined. So I guess like the average person's making, call it 45.
Yeah, I would have figured more around like
47. We'll call it. So, but so that's the average income now, and that doesn't really line up with the price of a house. So if, like I said, so that's the price of a normal house. The average income of a house is
$325.
Is $325?
That's my guess.
Okay.
That's my prediction.
Or
$285. Between that range. How about that? Could be way off.
Yeah. And again,
Probably,
this is mean sale of price homes in 2020 is 380,000.
Oh, okay.
383,000. So you're pretty close. But again, so if you're just doing simple math, like we said, it's going to take it 7, 8, 9 years to save for a house of like doing nothing else to pay for a house whereas back then it was like 2 years. So your mortgage was not as big of a percentage of your income, of what you had to spend the way it is now. So so it's like the average hours needed to buy even into the S&P. Okay, so even if you're trying to like, I'm going to invest in the stock market, you had to work about, it would say 30.9 hours to be able to, have enough to invest. Now that's up over 100. Okay, so like that based on an hourly wage, and it was like I said, the home thing, it was 2.4 years in 20, and now it's up to like 7.2. So there's just all these, and then a percentage of savings, right? Because people are always just like, hey, I'm gonna put, probably when our parents were growing up, and prior to 1971, everybody was putting 10 to 15% was the average, and it would vacillate year to year depending on what was going on, but 10 to 15%, 13% of their income went to their savings account, right? Which is a good way to be, smart way to be. What do you think? The financial crisis, it went all the way down to below, right before the financial crisis in 08, people were doing like around 3.5% was the average. So a lot of people are saving none because they can't afford to, because they have to just buy milk and pay their mortgage and pay their rent. Okay, and then it went steadily up between 2008 and 2014 or 15. It was people were saving more, got up closer to 10%, and then now it's back down to about 5. Okay, because people, again, like inflation's getting out of control. You just can't save money as easily because you have more expenses and colleges more. So even your parents, who, if they take out these loans to help pay for Johnny's tuition at some school, they're not going to be able to, like, they have a really hard time repaying those debts, and it makes it harder to keep your house and keep everything, because it's become very, very difficult because your dollar and your work just does not go as far as it used to. And people speculate it's just really because we got pulled off of this gold standard.
Hey, let's take a quick break here to talk about Upstart. I mean, this whole episode is about, debt and being harder to buy things. And, everyone understands that it's like tough times, man.
Yeah, very tough times. And like the debt, that's another thing. Okay. So we've talked about our country's debt, but the people's debt is every average citizen is much higher than it was in 1971 too. And thankfully, Upstart is a company out there to help you get that under control.
Yeah, we're with them, guys. Upstart, we recommend them to take a look into them if you're having trouble because it's a fast and easy way to pay off your debt. It's a personal loan, and it's all done online. So whether it's paying off credit cards, consolidating high-interest debt, or funding personal expenses, over 500,000 people have used Upstart to get one fixed monthly payment. Upstart knows that you're more than just a credit score. They take a lot of things into account here. And, they consider your income, current employment to find a smarter rate for your loan. And with a 5-minute online check, like I said, you could get your rate, and it could be upfront for your loans between $1,000 and $50,000. And you can receive the loans as fast as one business day after accepting your loan. To check it out, go to upstart.com/Eddie. That's right there. You can find out how Upstart can help lowering your monthly payments today. When you go to upstart.com/Eddie, EDDIE, go check out Upstart. It could definitely help you. It's worth the online browse at least to see what you got there for you. Yep. So, all right, that's upstart.com/Eddie. Let's hop back into the episode.
That it's really, if you look at like we have a health crisis, and I'm not talking about the pandemic, but, like people are unhealthy. They're like your medical costs on average are way higher now than they were in 1971. And
but do we have to get pulled off of that? Didn't he do that because it was like people were pulling all their shit out and our supply was rapidly dwindling? I mean,
yeah, but I would wonder if we weren't doing Vietnam, if we would have just been fine.
Yeah.
So it's hard to know exactly like, and then that was kind of like a post-war era thing too. It's like, I don't know if we were necessarily obligated to be the world's reserve currency forever. Now there's tremendous advantages with that, but there's also some, you have to be responsible for it too. So it's like a push and pull. So you do have the advantages, but you also have the issues that come along with it. And there's this quote by this economist named Friedrich Hayek, and he said, inflation is engineered by governments for governments, because people don't care like what the number is, what they make, as long as they can, that number can. So I bet you people in 71 were probably happier making 10,200 than people making 100,000 now, because their dollar just goes further. It just goes further. So that's kind of what people say, and then that's why you see every day crypto and Bitcoin get more and more publicity, and it's not. I don't know what the end game is there, if that'll ever become like an actual currency, because it's not really widely used as a currency now. It's really just an asset, and same as gold, right? Like no one pays for things in gold coins because you can't. And but like you can invest in it, and that I would wonder if, I know there are certain companies, and I feel like I read about like maybe an NFL team recently announced that they'll start allowing you to pay in Bitcoin, and Tesla, I know, like I
think people are getting like signing bonuses, like half in Bitcoin or something.
Is that right?
Too. Yeah,
okay.
I believe so. I believe I saw that.
Yeah, so I mean this website is really really fascinating.
What is it again?
It's called WTF happened in 1971.com. And then there's all sorts of other things that are crazy too. Like, and it's like, how does this make sense? But it's like, in terms of like meat consumption. Okay. So in 1971, beef, pork, and other things and chicken were all about the same. And now chicken is like quadruple the amount of people eating chicken protein than all the other meats. Because like, I don't know exactly how that's related to this, but it's like there's so many different things where you see like these crazy spikes, and all of those things started leading back to one, including like things as crazy as incarceration.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So like if you say,
does that line up with the whole drugs thing?
Nixon was definitely involved in that, the war on drugs too. But if you have, and that's when we start seeing like a lot of these like good manufacturing jobs leave the United States and go abroad. So if you have, crime is like a reaction a lot of time. Like some people are just predisposed to it, of course, and they're shitheads. But a lot of times it's people who are desperate, and they'll do something because, and then you see like that if you watch like The Godfather, right? And you see like the beginnings of organized crime in the United States. It was because they couldn't, the Irish mafia, they couldn't get jobs. So they had to rely on the mafia around them, and then they would do different things. The same thing with the Italians. And then because they were these immigrant people. But the rate of incarceration of men, starting in 1971, it was still like very, shockingly high at least for me, but it's 200 people out of, roughly 200 people out of every 100,000. Okay, so now what do you think it is for men?
Out of every 100,000?
Yeah.
So that was 20,000. I'll guess that it's 80,000.
Yeah, it's a little over 900. And this stat was from 2010. But anywhere, it's like between 900 and 1,000 per 100,000 now. And 71, because you had better jobs, you had more people having money, your wealth was spread out among the country more evenly. So now like the 1% has way more money than they did in 1971. So like the richest people are like richer than ever, and we've seen that obviously. Like that was like a news thing, like Bezos and all these people like fucking cleaned up during the pandemic, where everybody else is really struggling.
So what was the number? Sorry.
In 1971,
it was 200
it
out
was
of every
200 per 100,000.
Okay.
And this data is from 1925. And again, like you saw a little bit of a spike in incarceration rates during like the Great Depression era, and then after World War II, it normalized to what it was before the Great Depression, and it kind of basically stayed at that number. Okay, from the end of World War II right up until 1971, and then you see this like hockey stick spike, and now it's back over 900, between 900 and 1,000 per 100,000 people. So it's like every like segment that you could touch on, from health to incarceration rates. And again, I'm not saying that this is the only factor, but it is this would make you think that it is, at least. It's hard to like ignore some of these charts and be like it doesn't play a factor at all.
So was Nixon just a disaster?
Yeah, I would say he was a disaster. Now he came in after he was actually elected in a large part to kind of get us out of the war. Okay, that was an LBJ project. And if you look at like quotes from, there's this interview with Walter Cronkite and Kennedy before Kennedy got shot, and he would talk about, hey, like, they had been burned in the Cuba thing, which we talked about. And, the Vietnam was taking off, and he was saying, look, ultimately we'll help them and we'll send advisors, but it's their war. They're the ones who have to win it or lose it. And then he gets killed, and you start seeing an explosion of numbers of troops sent, dollars spent, bombs sent, our involvement. It was no longer we were helping the South Vietnamese fight the North. It was, we're fighting the North. We're fighting the Viet Cong. And that was, it was a dramatic close.
Damn.
Yeah.
That was, that's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
WTF happened in 1971. Go check it out. It is. The graphs are just,
it's crazy.
If you're a big line graph person,
you're going to get off on this website.
Yes, because there is.
You'll be Roman ready after reading this.
Yes, there is surprising information. So I don't know. It's wow.
What do you think?
I mean, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
it makes a lot of sense.
Was that coherent? How'd my brain do?
Good. I mean, it was better than mine for
Okay.
sure. Mine was kind of off early on. I was kind of all over the place and saying dumb shit. But that's not unusual, me saying dumb shit in these episodes, because I like to ask the dumb questions because I feel.
Yeah. And it's just like another thing where it's like they used to have another one that where we get into trouble, okay? And you get in trouble with big time in the housing market. It's all about speculation. So it's speculation versus production. So where's the investment really going? Are you investing, and I've been involved in manufacturing before. Like, it's very expensive to put in the infrastructure and get the real estate for the factory and all. It's very expensive to get started. like millions of dollars if you want to be in manufacturing. But you will invest in it and you'll get a return over time. So if you look at the rate of industrial production versus the volume of future trading, it is like, to call it even a hockey stick. Like industrial production is kind of steadily still climbed, and it did drop a little bit after 71, but like we're still going. Speculation is just out of control. Like it is just out of control. So it's like a scary thing. It's like kind of goes back to that other episode where it's like, I don't know, man. Like I feel like we're not out of the woods on a lot of this stuff yet. There's a lot of things we have to figure out, and I don't know what the answer is. But you know, it's fucked right now. And it's like, you see the same thing. The number of countries with banking crisis since 1971, giant spike, you know. So we talked about Venezuela before, where they had this runaway inflation, and it's like, why? Because their dollar is worthless. Well, it wouldn't be worthless if it was tied to a physical asset like gold.
Yeah. And just to kind of tie this together here too, this past weekend, obviously with Haiti and the Taliban and Afghanistan and everything, and someone tweeted this at us too. I just can't get Strauss Howell out of my head.
I know.
It is unbelievable how shit like this just continues to happen.
That Afghanistan thing looks so bad. I don't know if you saw the clip this morning of people like storming the airport and they're holding on to the outside of the plane because, like, I'll just hold on to this jet bomber carrier plane because it's better than staying in Kabul. Like, I'll try to hold on at 30,000 feet or whatever.
Yeah, negative 80 degrees.
Yeah,
whatever it is.
right. Like, you can't live. It's impossible.
Yes.
But they're that desperate because it's that scary. And it's one of those things where it's like, thank God I was born here. Where, like, things might get bad here, but, like, it's not that.
You don't have to worry about someone,
You don't have to worry about your dad's head getting chopped off in the street. Yeah.
Crazy.
So.
All right, man. That's it for today. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll be back tomorrow. We'll see you then.